didn't work the other day.
I know, was that meeting recorded, Diane, the communications one, or that wouldn't work either?
It was not recorded. Honestly, I think I was just so distracted by the fact that it didn't work
Yeah,
that I didn't even didn't work the other day. Pop in.
okay.
But it is live now, so that's good. Yep, I put in my ticket to IT, and apparently they've corrected things, so this is good.
All right, do we want to start with the turf and track, or? I don't know who wants to start.
Do you want an update on where we're at with the fields?
Yeah, and I think that we had discussed at the last meeting sort of what that's going to mean for our spring season, our fall season, any budget implications for that.
So Mike and I talked today, and he's definitely immersed in this and has a lot of detail. I'll kind of highlight a few things, and then Mike, if you want to piggyback at the end or whatever, anything I leave out. But so they call it mitigation. Is that the word? Yeah. So basically, they got a company to come in, and they spent 3 days. And to simplify this a little bit, it really is gluing of the seams. So they bring this glue in and they fix the seams, and that's pretty much what the whole thing is about. They have some rubber called G-Max tests that they look at. They feel it's okay for spring at this point in time. Before each season, if we have to do this, there's about a $2,000 charge that we would have to pay. And if we fully correct the matter and not try to piecemeal it every year, most likely it would be about 20,000. I think Tom Hall at one point in time mentioned that. So as you know, we'll probably at some point in time going to have to really bite the bullet and get this fixed. And Mike, anything else about that? That was sort of the short version. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just say that I did get a chance to talk with Billy. I wasn't able to connect with Todd today, but the mitigation, we actually got a little bit of a better deal on it than originally expected. We were able to get a local company to do it. And so the local company did not add any material. So the cost of the mitigation is going to come in at slightly under 10,000. Tom Hall had approved using the revolving account to cover those costs for this particular instance. Like Superintendent Prince said, it's about $2,000 to do that testing. The testing, if you recall from my presentation previously to the board, is really a third-party company that really it's good. So I'll mention it again because they really don't have a stake in anything, because they're not a company that does the work. Their only business is field testing. And so that bill is about $2,000. The town side did pay for that this year. There's been no discussions about who's paying all this next year, and there's nothing calculated in my budget for next year. So we would be looking at, as you remember from the report, the testing has to be done prior to every season. And then there would be some level of mitigation. Now, the mitigation may not always be the same. For example, this time what they did was they did all the gluing of the seams. to explain that in the weeds, they literally lift the pieces up and they vacuum out all the rubber, and then they glue it back down, and then they take the rubber that they vacuumed out and use it in other places on the turf field. And so there was no new rubber brought in. It was just leveled out across the field in the areas that were identified as problem areas. So it was really very detailed, very specific kind of work. Now, the company that had originally given the quote of the 20 to 25,000 was the company from Massachusetts that we've used in the past. And of course, they were coming from out of state. It included lodging, it included adding material, it included a much higher level of service than what we had in what we needed this time around. So, like Superintendent Prince said, I mean, the cost is going to be fluctuate depending on what is needed. We know that the cost of the testing is pretty standard and can be counted on, but certainly the cost of mitigation could be, who knows, anywhere between 10,000 and 50,000, I guess, each time. It depends on what's needed. And that's not identified until they do the testing. There is going to be a point in time, and that was made very clear in the report, that they're just going to say, we're done now. That, there's nothing we can do. Now, here's the issue. Could that be this summer for the fall? It's hard to say. Could that be next spring? It's really hard to be strategic in the thinking about this, because we're at such a bottom rung on the ladder that it's really almost season to season at this point. So the strategic plan would be to get it tested before each season and mitigate what needs to be mitigated. I don't know how you plan for that financially, because the mitigation depends on the testing and how bad it is at that time. So that's that part in a little bit more detail of what Superintendent Prince was saying.
Do you, Mike, have any idea when the testing would happen for the fall season? Like, are we gonna have any time to react to that test?
Yeah, we're hoping. I mean, we haven't nailed down the date with the company yet, but I had spoken with Todd about that, and we had originally spoken about June, because we start at the end of August, the fall season. I'm still very concerned that, if it can't be mitigated in the fall, I got to be honest. I think I can figure out most everything, except I can't figure out football. I just don't know where we would play football. And so, I think the timing of the testing is an interesting question. So thanks for asking, because you can't be too far out, but we can't be too close either because of preparing. So I'm hoping June. I got to talk with Todd again, but I'm hoping June is our window for that. And I'm hoping that Tom continues to approve using the revolving account, because I don't know where we're going to get. I haven't budgeted for that money. And the issue with using the revolving account is that was going to be our account that we used for overages when the turf field project was done. So as you know, like building a home, you're going to have other costs that come up. And so the revolving account was going to be that account that we use to help offset those overages. And that's going to continue to dwindle down. And so I am concerned about the number that we have, because it will be tight because of not having any cushion as we continue to use that revolving account.
Nick, did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Mike, you had commented a little while back in the conversation that this testing has to happen before every season. Is that standard, or is that because our turf is so old?
That is not standard. That's a great question. That is because our turf is so old. And that was one of the very first things on the recommendation from the company, is that you cannot use this field season to season without it being tested first. And it's really because it's so old. Normally speaking, back years ago when I first started and was working with Bruce Gullifer at that time, we tested the field maybe every 3 years.
Okay, so I think that, thank you for that, because I think that completes a very important narrative as we go to the community and look for this money and look for support to replace this field, because not only are we subjected to additional testing that basically doesn't allow us to plan more than one season ahead, right? But the results of that testing are essentially unknown. I mean, we don't know what the cost is going to be. We don't know where we're going to hit the final expiration date. And so all of those things make planning and stability of our, co-curricular and extracurricular activities that use that field in flux. And so I think we need to think about how we can use this necessity of testing, as well as the unknown mitigation costs, to help our community see the importance of replacing this field. So thank you for that clarification, because I think that helps the narrative.
I'll just add too that I think, like we said earlier, any reasonable person looking at that report is also going to say it can't go any longer, so but that takes a level of reason, to look at that. So I think all of those things coupled do create a good story. And I don't want to miss either that facility is used far beyond high school athletics and activities. And so, physical education classes, middle school programs, community events. And so I think that probably needs to be part of that story too, is, that it is a space that's, and listen, part of that discussion is going to have to also be the continual replacement plan for it. How did we get to this point where somebody thinks that it doesn't have to ever be replaced ever? I mean, we're really, I think that's going to be part of that discussion too.
Sarah, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. Sorry, I set a gate up so that my dog wouldn't run away, and I clearly left the gate too big, the gap too big. So I just had to go chase him. So Mike, you keep saying that we don't have anything budgeted for a potential mitigation that were to come. So if we need to do some mitigation, what's our plan? Like where is that? Do we need to make room for that in our budget? Do we need to have a conversation with town, whether it's in their budget? Like, it seems like we need to have that conversation sooner rather than later to figure out where this is going to sit and how we pay for it. Cause I think just assuming it's going to come out of this revolving account is probably not a safe assumption.
I mean, Kate can speak to this too, but I completely agree with you. I really appreciated during the budget discussions when you said about, are there things that we could do now to kind of get ready for what we know is going to be the inevitable, us assuming responsibility for all of it. And Kate and I have had some discussions about that since you said that. And I think there are some things that we can do, and probably thinking about earmarking some funds for that is probably a smart thing to do. Now, understanding though that at this time, it was also made really clear that besides the turf field, maintenance of the other facilities were going to stay with the town. Now, I don't know that we've had a deeper conversation with that. So does that mean if it's approved and we do the work next spring, from that point forward, it's ours? And if that's the case, do we need to account for that in the budget? Because there's contracts with this. You know, part of this renovation includes us signing a long-term maintenance contract. That's very expensive for the company to come in annually and do, you know, the normal maintenance that has to be done to a turf field. And so, or are we not there yet? But I do think it's probably worth that deeper dive into that to find out for sure, is the town going to keep the turf field, and are we talking next year's budget or 3 years from now budget? Or so I think there are some things we can do, but I think, like you said, the first thing is to make sure that we're all on the same page of that conversation.
Yeah. And I guess another assumption I have too, and it was, as of right now, right, we haven't agreed to take over maintenance and responsibility of it. So technically the funds to do that should be in the town budget. So whether it's in their budget or our budget, it all kind of rolls up to the same area. So that shouldn't really matter. But I guess, one, we need to confirm that they haven't actually taken that out, with the assumption that we would then put it in ours. And two, I just think we need to progress that conversation about who's taking ownership of this and when that's going to really kickstart, because that's, to me, doesn't seem really that clear. And I think we need to get that sorted relatively quickly.
I know Kate wants to speak, and I'm sorry to chime in, but it has been an interesting relationship, and it continues to evolve. For example, one of the things that we really needed to have, and this is really in the weeds, but an example, one of the things that we really needed to have happen is, because of COVID and because of how we have to, have the benches work for baseball, we had to have another gate put in at the baseball field. And so when that work was done, the bill was sent to me to pay. And so it's just that relationship continues to evolve. So
I would say a couple of things to Sarah's point, and she might have had to chase the puppy again. But one thing that comes to mind is that there is still, as far as I know, something on the order of a couple of $100,000 in the revolving repairs fund on the town side. That was the number that we heard when they first started talking to us about moving responsibility for the turf field replacement project to us. So, I think the intent in saying that was, well, you can knock that off the purchase price of the project, but you also have to remember that we have mitigation and testing to do before we even get to a project. So in my mind, I think that funding should be available to keep the turf alive until we can replace it. And the second thing I'll say is that I did have a follow-up conversation with Todd Souza a couple of weeks ago, just to say, are we sure that there's no discussion of anything right now in FY22 budget beyond placing the turf field replacement project in our CIP budget? And he responded, we're still planning to run things in this coming budget cycle. We're not planning to turn over management of any facilities or scheduling or all of the, big picture things that we've been talking about in this coming budget year. That's Todd Souza telling me on the phone. That's great, that's not his intent. But I agree with Sarah that it would be really important to look at the line items for the community services budget for the town of Scarborough and make sure that there's something in there that says, that we're going to pay someone to do rec track and we're going to pay someone to come and maintain the field. And it's not so much the turf field, because I think that's got to be a collaborative piece, but it's the other pieces that we haven't signed on for. And I, for one, have been really straightforward with Todd and with Tom Hall to say, no, we're not signing on to anything besides this project in our budget for public approval.
Hey, I'll just add one thing. It'd be great to get a firm number because the last number that I was given by Todd Sousa in the revolving account was 125.
Oh, that's.
And that was before the expense was taken out to do this latest mitigation.
And so that's knocked down by about 10,000.
Yeah, it'll be slightly under 10,000 for
Yeah.
what, and that's it. That's an anticipated number. They haven't gotten the final invoice.
Well, I can ask Ruth about how much is in the revolving fund or whatever we call that, the turf field fund.
Yeah, I've always referred to it as a revolving account because that's how Bruce had previously referred to it as, but I don't know what they actually call it.
Yeah, I can find that out. I guess, whether it's 100,000 or 200,000, my point is that I don't consider that to be like a discount on the project because I think we're going to blow through that with testing and mitigation before we get a project going. So in my mind, that money's kind of spent and it should be spent for us to keep the turf alive in whatever frame that is. Until such time as we can get it replaced. But it does help me.
The good news is that it has been mitigated and they can play on it this spring anyways.
Yeah, and it does help me sleep in terms of, well, we haven't got an extra 10 or 20 or $30,000 in Mike's budget to do this during FY22 right now. But if we can get to the point where we actually have a project and we can budget for FY23. And the same thing is true for FY23 in terms of actually transferring responsibility for other facilities, transferring responsibility for scheduling. That there's a short-term agreement in my mind that says, we're not going to do this for next year because we have our budget on the table, guys. We can't be trying to figure this out on top of everything else. But as we go through the next year and we have time to figure out the actual costs, we can talk about a smooth transition. Because I think Mike and I agree the transition idea, and Todd as well, it is smart. It makes sense for us to be managing the properties that are on our property, if you will.
I agree, and Todd and I have had discussion about this, but it completely makes sense. It's just the thought of it is overwhelming to do in a window of time, and that's why I think back to what Sarah said during the budget discussions are there things that we could be doing now to kind of prepare for what we know is going to be inevitable. And I think that would be more strategic. And maybe it's at least having some discussions about how is that relationship going to work between Todd and I, for example? Are they going to be Todd's employees, my employees? How is that relation? I mean, even those types of discussions might be of value, let alone financial discussions. How is it going to work between the school relationship with the town relationship? Are we going to have access to that equipment and, those things? And so maybe some of those discussions that aren't so money related are things that we could begin to strategically think about and talk about and plan for.
Yeah, and I walk around putting price tags on everything, and that's really the point is we need to know what the people and the equipment and the processes and the tasks that need to be accomplished. We need to know what those are before I can put my little stickers on.
Right. So those conversations are still ongoing, right? And we have yet to commit to actually agreeing that this is the best thing for the schools, right? We're still going to do all that legwork before we.
In my mind, and to Sarah's point, it wouldn't hurt to ask it again and say, hey, guess what? This is what we think. Is this what you still think? I've talked directly with Todd Sousa about it. I haven't talked with Tom Hall personally about it since the first conversation where he laid out the idea to us.
But as far as the FY22 budget goes and any costs that we're going to incur in the coming year, where is, and I'm asking this of you and Sarah, because I just don't know, what's the best way to go about finding out what they have in their budget to maintain that field for the coming year?
Well, we can ask Todd.
Just,
Uh,
okay.
And we can read the community services budget book too.
Okay.
I have a copy now.
They'll
I
have
haven't
a,
posted
similar to how we have like a department meeting too, right? They'll have a community services one as well, so we can
Right.
pay attention to that.
That's a really good point. And on Monday, the town council finance committee, I spoke with Colette this morning because they had added an extra meeting that I wasn't sure what it was about. And one of the things they're going to do is decide which department they meet on which day, because I guess they hadn't plotted that out for their individual meetings, kind of like our workshop where they take, one department and focus in on their budget. So that's a really good point. If we know when the community services one is going to be, which we could learn on Monday, I assume we could be present for that.
Okay. All right, did anyone have anything else on that? I think that, just to wrap up the conversation, I think we will assume that you guys as a group are working through the next steps for actually transitioning the turf and field, and if that's the direction we're headed, and the finance committee will keep an eye on the cost for the budget this year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for that. And then I think the next thing was the ADA compliance on the playground, just trying to get an update on what has been done with last year's budget, what's planned in this year's budget.
So this year, we did not have any funding for the playgrounds. We took that out in CIP. And we said that we were going to try to accomplish a few things through our operating budget and through CRF. And we were able to do some work on the playgrounds, just getting some matting down for wheelchair access through CRF funds. The grant had some space for like outdoor stuff in general, and we folded it into that. But we did not retain the playground funding in the FY21 budget.
And just to be clear, Kay, we haven't not put that matting down yet because it has been way too soggy. So we've been waiting for it to dry up a little bit, but we do have it, and we can put it down. Probably getting close to being able to put it down now.
As soon as the mud goes away. But that's a pretty small piece.
Was that at all the K-5 schools?
It was primarily at the requested schools, which was Wentworth and Eight Corners.
Yeah.
Because they were the schools that had students that needed access via wheelchair.
Yeah, and I think if we look back at what were asking for in last year's budget, we were really looking at a big project over time and chunking it. And Eight Corners and Wentworth, even at that time, were the two schools that had the most students with disabilities trying to access space. So Todd and I had a vision in terms of just things like pathways and surfaces being like the low-hanging fruit, where we could make sure that physically there was a way to push a wheelchair onto the playgrounds. But it's a bigger concept as well, because what we're hoping is that we can have a team come together that's not just Todd and me, who know very little about folks with disabilities, but OTs, PTs, special services folks, and some experts to tell us what equipment we could purchase and put on the playground that would give more children more fun. And more ability to be entertained on the playground in the same way that a student without disabilities has the ability to have some fun on the playground.
And there was a person I was working with at Wentworth last spring. Kelly had assigned, and I'm drawing a blank on her name. She was doing sort of Diane, you might be able to remember her name. She's still there. I've forgotten it, but anyway,
Was it
she had a list
Stephanie?
of things. What's that?
Was it Stephanie? Oh, no, it was Crystal.
I
Oh,
want to
geez.
say Jessica.
That's terrible. I can't remember
Anyway.
either, but
I just saw her today in the hall at Wentworth, so I know she's still there.
she exists. We just
but
can't
then-
label her.
but but then I had given her a big pile of playground things, books and catalogs and things to look through, with the intent that she was going to come back to me with some ideas for that very thing you just suggested, Kate, that they knew what their kids would probably benefit from the most. And then COVID hit and everything went kaflooey and we stopped. So, and then at 8 Corners, Ann Lovejoy had assigned some folks, one of the people in her front office, I think her phys ed teacher, and one of the people in special needs as well. And they were kind of forming a group and coming up with ideas, and then everything blew up when COVID struck us last spring. So here we are, a year later.
And Todd, I think it's important to say that at this point, we're not in danger, running the risk of being out of compliance for ADA. I don't think we're going to, have an inspector come in and say that your playgrounds are inadequate. But we realize that they really are. That in practice, on a daily basis, we know that kids are struggling and staff are struggling to allow kids in wheelchairs to have some fun. So it's not so much a compliance worry as it is an equity worry, I think.
Right. I mean, we technically use the engineered wood fiber that says it's ADA compliant, all the
Right,
wood,
yeah,
wood
it
chips.
meets the requirements, but it's
But good luck. I
it's
mean,
bullshit.
you got to be my size or larger to roll any sizable child in a wheelchair through that stuff. And we know that the people helping these children every day are not 6'2", 200 pounds, whatever. They're young women or just smaller in general. And they're just not, that's putting them at risk. So that's why we went immediately for the matting. It's basically like a mesh metal mat that will sit right on top of the chips and you almost blend right in, and you could roll over those and get to the swings or something like that. But that's where we ended up grinding to a halt. We actually had another plan at Wentworth in this grassy area off the main wood chip playground that was basically turns into a mud bowl every spring and fall when it gets wet. So we were gonna see what it would cost to dig that out and just put artificial grass there, because then it stays dry, it drains well, it can be accessed with wheelchairs. And they were gonna put some sort of interactive things for students with special needs to play on or with in that area. So then you could avoid the wood chip area and having these extensive paths across vast tracts of the playground. So
Great.
that was an idea, and it just never came to fruition because everything went sideways.
Well, and a lot of creative thinking, right? But then not also a lot of funding right now. So we're hoping that if we just put it back in there and say, no, we really want to move forward with this. This is important. Obviously, there's a lot of things in CIP that are like that in FY22's budget. It's basically all, hey, we didn't do this last year because we were trying to cut our budget down to nothing. And the town's in the same boat. Their CIP budget is insane because they deferred everything.
Yeah.
And, guess what, folks? Here it is. It didn't go away. It's the need didn't disappear because you didn't want to spend money on it.
Yep. And the money that we have budgeted will allow you to accomplish what you want to accomplish for those.
So
playgrounds?
the amount that we have in FY22 is the 100,000 that we put in FY21. And again, it won't get us 100% done, but it'll get us a long way on those 2 schools
Okay.
which have the highest need. But Todd and I both see that as a long range upgrade across K-5.
And it's beyond ADA compliance at this point. I mean, if you look at the playground structure at the K2 schools, those were put in 1992. So, here we are 29 years later.
They're getting a little ratty.
they just need either replacement or significant restoration, to try and keep them safe and and updated. So it was suggested to me a few years ago that we should just have the PTOs raise money for this type of thing. It shouldn't go into the school budget. Anyone who says that has no idea the expense of playgrounds. They are ridiculously expensive because you don't go out and buy them every day. You buy them once every 20 to 25 years, and it's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to create them. So
I don't remember what the budget was for the Wentworth playground when we put that in, but it was in the hundreds of thousands because we were able to repurpose a few things, but it was
the equipment alone, not the creation of the space. The equipment alone was over $110,000.
yeah.
Yeah.
So to your
is that-
question, putting $100,000 in the budget doesn't get the job done.
That was not the installation. That was just buying the equipment. Then we had to pay. So
I think there's and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think we felt like there wasn't really a appetite in the community to just throw $1 million out there and refurbish all the playgrounds. So it's a chip away kind of situation. In much the same way as we chip away at HVAC and we chip away at roofs and masonry and things like that. But the playgrounds just haven't had that kind of attention.
All right, that's helpful. Nick, Sarah, did you guys have?
No questions on that, but I have an AOB if we have time.
Yeah.
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 And apologies, I should have raised this as an agenda item, but can we just get an update or discuss where we are with the building steering committee? Because we're in budget season now, and I know that the town isn't going to start to review the CIP until it's one of the last things they review, but I would be shocked if that doesn't come up at our school budget review.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the first week of May is when they get to CIP. But yeah, we were really kind of hoping that we would have something a little more substantive in terms of a plan to offer for how we intended to spend the money that we've got in our CIP budget, right?
You mean offer to the council?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. So Nick and I, as the new building steering committee members from the board, we're going to meet with Tom and Andrew Bradley next week.
Awesome.
Cool.
So I think it will be really helpful just to get like a better sense. And then, Andrew did express that some of the steering committee members are interested in helping again, but I think it will be helpful first to meet with Andrew and Tom and get a little bit more solid direction on what we want to accomplish when we bring them all back in. So
awesome.
I'm working on it. It's just taking time. And then the other piece of that is, as far as bringing the counselors up to date, I had sent Sarah and Nick, I had sent you guys that thing that I started putting together, but I didn't want to go too deep into it if I was like in my own little world as to what direction it was headed. So I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at that or not.
I haven't yet, and so that's my bad. And I will. I think it might be good though to get in that meeting from Tom, a little bit more clarity on what would be useful. I mean, we can go back and do the whole history, right? But if ultimately what they want to know is just how we're going to spend the money, then we just tell them that.
I think they do want a little more than that. And in talking to Tom, I am going to show him what I had sent to you guys to see if we're on the right track of what he thinks the council wants to see. But I do think it's just a question of, this has passed through so many councils and through so many boards that it's just getting everyone on the same page.
Yeah. I think, Sarah and I had that similar conversation of like, well, geez, guys, we've been talking about this for 10 years. Just because you just walked in the door doesn't mean that nothing happened.
Right.
Not to be snarky. I feel a little snarky today, but, at the same time, if we, hey, go pet your dog. If we want to be successful, and if what is successful is spoon feeding some history to folks who haven't read it yet, then right on, we'll do that. So I agree that's a useful tactic.
Yeah.
Well, I think when Kristen and I talked about this earlier, about having that meeting with Tom and Andrew, I think it's really important for us to just be directional in this conversation before we re-engage the building steering committee community members, because I'm sure, and I know that a lot of them left very frustrated that, you know, that whole process kind of spun out in about 15 different directions. Everything from what about site selection? Where are the monies? What about, then there was discussion about phases, and it kind of just got really amorphous and the conversation just lost its momentum. And I know that frustrated folks that were on that committee last time. So before we kind of bring that group back together, I just think it's a really smart idea Kristen had to bring, you know, just Tom and Andrew together with she and I, so that we can just, I bet that Andrew can answer a lot of questions for Tom, and Tom will really help Andrew see what the immediate priorities to get buy-in from council are. And I just think it'll be a better use of everybody's time moving forward after that conversation. So I do think that's the best, a smart way to go.
Yeah, it sounds like a great plan.
Anything else?
Just remind them that we also have $100,000 that we can use right now if they want, if they think there's anything that we can use, you know, between now and the end of the year.
Yes.
Not that there's anything else going on.
We could use it for playgrounds. No, wait, no.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, site selection, right, is what really where I think the next thing that has to happen. And I think Tom will hopefully be able to give us a lot of insight on that. And who knows, maybe it will be a really quick hit the ground running with that 100,000.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Cool. Thanks, Katie.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for the update. That was very helpful. And I think that's it. End early.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.